on underwater archaeology of the university, from the University of Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras campus. And she did graduate studies in maritime civilizations with an emphasis on coastal geomorphology, maritime history, and marine archaeology at the Institute of the Department of Maritime Civilizations at the University of Haifa in Israel. And Dr. Rivera-Collazo began working in underwater archaeology in the 1990s, having worked on famous shipwrecks such as the Tantura Lagoon ship graveyard, the pipe wreck in the Dominican Republic, the Guinessar boat, and the Magan Michael wreck, all in Israel. So after working for some time in Israel, Isabel became director of the Program of Archaeology and Ethnohistory of the Institute of Puerto Rican Culture, where she led a long-term project to document historical ship graffiti. During her PhD, Isabel shifted to environmental archaeology, geoarchaeology, and maritime culture. And she's been focusing on coastal zones and shallow water since then. In 2012, Isabel became an assistant professor at the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at the University of Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras campus, where she established Puerto Rico's first environmental archaeology lab and began her long-term project, which is called Human Paleoecology of Puerto Rico. She also was named council member of the government's Council for the Protection of Puerto Rico's Underwater Heritage in representation of the University of Puerto Rico. Since 2016, Isabel became an assistant professor in biological, ecological, and human adaptations to climate change in the Department of Anthropology and Scripps Institution of Oceanography here at UC San Diego. And here she directs the Human Ecology and Geoarchaeology Laboratory. Today, Isabel's work focuses on sea level change, dynamism of coastal geomorphology, and human response to climate change. She uses geoarchaeology to reconstruct ancient coastal landscapes and sudden catastrophic events, and marine biology of mollusks to help understand how people use the coastal and marine ecosystems through time. Dr. Rivera-Collazo also co-directs the California Cultural Heritage Climate Vulnerability Project, working with tribes and local stakeholders, identifying and to help protect cultural heritage. Her lab collaborates with communities in California, Puerto Rico, Barbuda, Antigua, and Colombia, conducting research and training in coastal and underwater archaeology and recovering lessons from the past to understand present and future risks and hazards of climate change to habitat and food security. And you can see why we are so fortunate to have Isabel on our faculty and to help build the Scripps Center of Marine Archaeology. So today, Isabel's talk is going to focus on the 2001 UNESCO Convention and Underwater Cultural Heritage in Latin America and the Caribbean. So we'll give her a virtual welcome. Isabel, please.
Thanks so much, Tom, for that introduction. It's crazy to see how many things. It's an honor for me to kickstart this SCMA Symposium series today by talking about the 2001 UNESCO Convention. This past summer, between summer and fall, I had the opportunity to be part of a virtual training that was offered for specifically focused on Latin America and the Caribbean. And it's my pleasure to be able to share that with you, as well as some of the efforts that me and my colleagues are leading in Latin America and the Caribbean regarding underwater archaeology. But before I start, I want to make sure that I recognize the support of my incredibly awesome colleagues from Colombia, Professors Carlos del Cairo and Carla Riera, without whom I would not be talking today about capacity building in Latin America, nor about the UNESCO Convention. They are the hands behind the coordination and the operationalization of the underwater archaeology training this fall. Carlos also gave me some feedback, great feedback, for what I'm going to be sharing with you today, including the data of the results of the training. And so thank you, Carlos and Carla. Maybe they will catch the recording later. And I'm honored to be able to call them both my colleagues, and I'm looking forward to continue working with them. Thanks so much for their work. It's just magnificent. Okay, so getting to today's topic, I will begin by defining the underwater cultural heritage from the perspective of the 2001 UNESCO Convention, summarizing its aims, principles, and definitions. I will then focus on the convention's annex, which I think will be particularly important for the SCMA. The annex sets rules for good practice in underwater archaeology and the protection of underwater heritage. Then I will present an overview of the scope of activities and resources linked to the convention through UNESCO, and I will focus specifically on the capacity building program. This background will contextualize the work that we did this past summer and during fall with the 2021 virtual training, which was based on the new manual for the protection of cultural heritage in Latin America and the Caribbean. Before I go into details of what is the 2001 UNESCO Convention, I will explain briefly, especially for the students who might not be familiar, what is this organization that I will be referring here, UNESCO. UNESCO is the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. It originated from a 1942 conference of allied ministers and of education, which was composed by representatives of the governments of the European countries that were confronting Nazi Germany and its allies. The UNESCO itself was founded in 1945, immediately after the end of World War II. And in its creation, the UNESCO states that it is their goal to work towards international peace through cooperation in education, sciences, and culture at a global scale. Being an international body, UNESCO is highly political. The members, which are known as referred as parties, so if I talk about the parties did this or the parties did that, a party is a nation member of the UNESCO. So the members, the parties participate in representation of their nation. So if a convention is adopted, it is voted by the nations who are members of the United Nations as an organization. Ratifying or not ratifying a convention is a very politically charged decision. And you'll see why I'm making this statement in a moment. So the 2001 UNESCO Convention for the Protection of Underwater Cultural Heritage was adopted at UNESCO's plenary session on November 4, 2001. Underwater cultural heritage has been covered by the UNESCO's recommendation on principles for archaeological excavations since the 1950s, I think 1956. But those recommendations were effective only within the territorial waters of the nations. There was this gap, this void of cultural heritage that was beyond territorial waters. There was no instrument to address the threats and protection of submerged heritage in international waters that could also, so an instrument that could also be used as a wider reaching international legal instrument. There is another law, the United Nations Convention on the Law on the Sea, UNCLOS. It thinks more about the economic exploitation of the seabed And there are some aspects of UNCLOS that do apply to cultural heritage, but the text in that convention, it is ambiguous and subject to interpretation, and that placed the heritage at a higher risk rather than protecting it. So the 2001 convention establishes, address that gap. They started trying to, where's my mouse? They started trying to get it signed in the 70s. I think the effort to create the convention, the 2001 convention, started in 1976. And when they finished signing it in 2001, it establishes an international regime for reporting, consultation, and coordination in the implementation of protective measurements for heritage that lies within the exclusive economic zone. So these zones that you see in this graph are the ones that are delimited by the UNCLOS, by the Convention of the Sea, Law of the Sea. And the 2001 convention allows for the protection of cultural heritage beyond the territorial waters into the exclusive zone, including the continental shelf and deeper waters. The convention, however, does not prejudice the rights, jurisdiction, and duties of states under international law. Let's see. Come on. Next slide. The 2001 UNESCO Convention starts by acknowledging that there is a wealth of cultural sites underwater that record all traces of human existence, which, similarly to archaeological sites on land, have the potential to yield an abundance of information on information about people, the oceans, and human life on the planet. The convention recognizes that underwater cultural heritage is integral to the heritage of humanity and the history of people, of nations, and their relationships within with each other. And then states that this heritage should be protected by all states. It also recognizes that the public is interested and appreciates cultural heritage, and that it has the right to enjoy the educational and recreational benefits of responsible, non-intrusive access to in situ cultural heritage. In addition to this, the convention recognizes the value of public education to contribute to awareness, appreciation, and protection of heritage. And actually, as we're moving now in the decade of the oceans and the blue economy, UNESCO, this aspect of the UNESCO Convention has also engaged very deeply with the Sustainable Development Goals, as it is recognized that underwater cultural heritage can contribute not just to the protection of heritage and the educational aspects, but also for the economic development of parties of different nations. The convention defines underwater cultural heritage as all traces of human existence having a cultural, historical, or archaeological character for at least 100 years. That includes sites, structures, buildings, artifacts, human remains, the associated archaeological and natural contexts, the objects of prehistoric character, the vessels, aircraft, other vehicles, their cargo, and the archaeological context. The convention clearly stipulates that pipelines, cables, and installations that are still in use are not to be considered part of the cultural heritage. So the convention does not protect these pipes, lines, cables, but does protect everything else. This convention has four main principles. First, the obligation to preserve underwater cultural heritage. Second, to stimulate the in situ preservation of heritage as a first option. To emphasize that no commercial exploitation of heritage should occur. And fourth, to invite and stimulate training and information sharing. These four principles influence the activities and programs that are promoted by the Secretariat of the Convention. One of the bases of the convention is recognizing the fact that underwater cultural heritage is threatened by unauthorized activities and the commercial exploitation of underwater heritage, particularly for its sale, like looting and selling of cultural heritage remains. It also recognizes that the increased availability and ease of use of advanced technology, in particular since the 1940s and the development of the aqualung by Cousteau, or the further accessibility to scuba equipment, and more recently, the access to supported diving systems and faster diving technology, that this accessibility places the heritage at further risk. So within this context, the convention aims to codify and develop rules that protect and preserve cultural heritage. In addition to that, they also look to stimulate the cooperation among states, international organizations, scientific institutions, professional organizations, archaeologists, divers, and the public at large. And the convention also includes the identification of governing criteria of professional skills and scientific methods to be used to survey, excavate and protect underwater cultural heritage. So far, of all the parties of the United Nations, 71 parties have ratified the convention. 21 of these parties are in Latin America or the Caribbean. And it's important to notice that the United States has not ratified the convention. But remember that I had mentioned that ratifying a convention is a very politically charged decision. Aside of the body of the convention, it also has an annex, which I think is even more relevant than the convention itself for us as practitioners beyond the politics or international relationships. As practitioners, this annex is even more relevant for us. It contains detailed practical guidelines and regulations regarding how a project is to be designed, the competence and qualifications required for people undertaking interventions, the planning for funding excavation projects, the documentation of archaeological excavation on the water, and the methodologies on conservation and site management. The annex states that every professional working in the field of underwater cultural heritage should strictly comply with these rules. It is a super useful document, which I highly recommend that we all become familiar with. For example, it highlights as a rule the use of non-destructive techniques and states that if excavation or recovery is necessary, the methods must be as non-destructive as possible and contribute to the preservation of the remains. Remember that the convention looks to preserve the heritage in situ. It also states that activities directed at underwater cultural heritage sites must avoid the unnecessary disturbance of human remains and venerated sites, details how to design a project. It includes the identification of methods, composition of the team, their qualification, their experience, plans for analysis, safety policy, and also an environmental policy, etc. It requires that preliminary work must evaluate the significance and vulnerability of the underwater cultural heritage and its surrounding environment to damage by the proposed project, and the consequences of any potential intrusion for the long-term stability of the affected heritage. Finally, the annex also states that all activities must be undertaken and directed by a qualified underwater archaeologist with scientific competence that is appropriate to the complexity of the project and requires including an environmental policy to ensure that the seabed and marine life are not unduly disturbed. I would like to, take this time to urge all of us to become deeply familiar with the annex, because even if the US has not ratified the convention, we can be better at adopting the rules as stipulated in the convention's annex. So based on the convention, UNESCO developed a series of tools for implementation of the principles stated in this convention, especially, and more specifically, they have developed tools in education, practitioner networks, training materials, and capacity building programs, and materials for public access. One of the main challenges to protect underwater cultural heritage is the need to develop knowledge of and capacities to study, protect, and manage the heritage in different nations around the world. It's very challenging because there are so many different needs in different areas, so we cannot use a blanket solution for everything. To break it down into pieces, the UNESCO Secretariat has developed a large network of experts and institutions to assist the member states in capacity building at multiple scales. These networks include the UNESCO University Twinning Network, or UniTwin. It's called UNESCO University Twinning Network on Underwater Archaeology. They also developed the UNESCO Capacity Building Program, the International Center of Underwater Archaeology, and the Education for the Youth Program, which focuses on teachers and youth. And this document that is here in the screen, the Heritage for Peace and Reconciliation, is one of the documents that was prepared especially for teachers. I want to focus specifically on the UniTwin and the Capacity Building Program. UniTwin was established in 2012 after conversations that started in, I think it was in the 90s, 1992. It has 4 membership categories: full members, associated members, related members, and accredited observers. The full members at the moment, according to the webpage, are Flinders University, Marseille, Alexandria University in Egypt, East Carolina, Nicolaus Copernicus University, Akdais in Turkey, Southampton in England, Cadiz in Spain, Southern Denmark, Warsaw University, Texas A&M, and the University of Haifa. I think that the University of Externado in Colombia either is now a full member or an associated member, but they were admitted last year. Membership depends on the type of the degree or engagement that the university has with underwater archaeology, and the certification that all the work conducted by the academic institution is done in compliance with the principles of the UNESCO Convention. UniTwin has developed also a model code for practice, model code of practice for safe diving operations, and a code of ethics for divers in underwater archaeology. And I want to mention briefly that I was discussing the code of practice for safe diving operations with Christian, and our diving safety is very similar, and it's our practices to comply with the safe diving operations are as stated by the UNESCO. The capacity building program addresses the need to train professionals that can safeguard heritage sites. For that, they have developed a series of trainings, educational materials, and training programs that are organized by the Secretariat headquarters or its field offices in collaboration with different partners. According to the UNESCO's webpage, they have offered 5 trainings in Africa, 1 in Asia, 1 in Turkey, 4 in Europe, and 8 in Latin America and the Caribbean. The most recent training, the 2021 virtual training that I was part of this fall, is an adaptation of this capacity building program to the global restrictions that we saw due to the pandemic, but still aims to further the need that exists in spite of the pandemic to build professional capacity to protect underwater cultural heritage. The UNESCO Secretariat has several very useful training manuals available as open access and often in multiple languages. As you can see, this one has English, French, Spanish, and Arabic, I think. Available in multiple languages in their webpage. This includes the 2013 manual for activities directed at underwater cultural heritage, the 2012 training manual for the protection and management of underwater cultural heritage in Asia and the Pacific, the Conservation of Underwater Archaeological Finds Manual, the 2014 Underwater Cultural Heritage in Small and Developing Island States, among many other manuals, books, and articles. They also have brochures and information kits in multiple languages on different topics, from the Diver Code of Ethics to the convention itself. It's a very useful resource. In 2021, Martin Manders from the University of Leiden and Chris Underwood, president of ICOMOS International Committee on the Underwater Cultural Heritage, edited the new training manual for the protection and management of underwater cultural heritage in Latin America and the Caribbean, which was designed to address the specific needs of the complexity of our heritage in this region. The Manual for the Protection and Management of Underwater Cultural Heritage in Latin America and the Caribbean was published in the framework of UNESCO's 2020 to 2021 program and budget through the UNESCO's Regional Office for Culture in Latin America and the Caribbean in Havana, and the UNESCO Cluster Office in Quito, Ecuador, with representation from Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, and Venezuela. And it also had support from the Cluster Office for the Caribbean in Jamaica. It also had economic support from the International Program for Maritime Heritage of the Cultural Heritage Agency of the Netherlands. The content of this manual was possible due to the support of and stellar participation of a huge number of superstars in the protection of underwater cultural heritage. Aside from Chris Underwood and Martin Manders, I also want to highlight the coordination and work of Tatiana Villegas from Cuba and Arturo Rey da Silva. I think Arturo, I don't remember where he's from, but I know he's living in Italy. As well as all the other professors and specialists that participated in the training. Let me focus on the manual first, and then we'll go to mention briefly the components of the training. The training manual covers 17 units and 7 appendices. The unit starts with the 2001 UNESCO Convention. It also includes basic concepts of underwater archaeology, the management of underwater cultural heritage, and an explanation of underwater archaeological resources. The next units are more detailed, spanning desk-based assessments and significance assessments, data management, GIS, in situ preservation, intrusive techniques, conservation, boat and shipbuilding traditions for Latin America and the Caribbean, material culture analysis, museology, publications, and public engagement. Given that it is a training manual, it also includes a unit on diving in underwater cultural heritage sites and appendices that present examples of hands-on or practical guides, including site recording, terminology for shipbuilding, small watercraft recording methods, and others. All the content was written thinking specifically of the type of heritage that we find in Latin America and the Caribbean. Once the training manual was launched, we also coordinated a course on using it, like implementing it. It's actually the training manual was thinking as a foundational document for this foundational course. The training course was aimed at practitioners, university students, teachers from the region, and received economic and technical support also from the International Program for Maritime Heritage from the Netherlands. Given the pandemic, usually this course is very hands-on, it's very practical. It has examples, takes people diving, it's a very practical hands-on. It includes theory, but most of it is focused on developing hands-on skills. But given the pandemic, this wasn't possible. So we shifted, in this occasion, we shifted the training to a virtual environment. So the work was mostly theoretical, but we did include virtual activities in a more immersive scenario. The call for the course described, this photo up here shows our initial meeting when we started the course, when we launched the course, and it has many of the, not everyone, but many of the professors, and you can see me right there. The call for the course described the ocean as the biggest museums yet to be fully discovered by the public. Actually, in this video, Tatiana is also mentioning, as part of the invitation, mentioning how the sea is so important for the Caribbean, how we are so many island states, how important it is to also focus on the cultural heritage that lies underwater. Focusing on our region, the underwater cultural heritage spans from pre-Columbian settlements and watercrafts to the earliest European trade shipwrecks and settlement ruins, such as Port Royal in Jamaica. And then interested people on the course were invited to apply for a space. So it wasn't an open, an open opportunity. Interested people had to apply in order to be admitted for the course. The course started the first week of August and ran for 11 weeks. It was designed to have weekly asynchronous activities, including a series of recorded microcapsules and practical workshops or activities in an immersive virtual environment. Every week included a keynote lecture, several microcapsules on specific topics. Each microcapsule was like between 5 to 10 minutes long, and one group meeting per topic. The weeks followed all the units of the training manual and some of the appendices. As you can see here, week first spoke about the UNESCO Convention. Week 2 spoke about basis of underwater archaeology. Week 3, management and types of resources. Week 4 spoke about assessments. Week 5 about data and GIS. Week 6 about in situ protection and intrusive methods. Week 7 about conservation, week 8 about diving, week 9 about traditional boat and shipbuilding in Latin America and the Caribbean and analysis of material culture, and week 10 spoke about museums, public archaeology, and publications. In week 10, we also added a more detailed topic of effective community engagement for heritage protection and management. I want to highlight the brilliant role of Carla Riera, and in particular, and Carlos Del Cairo, who were always available and handled brilliantly all the digital work and allowed us to make wonderful videos and teaching materials very easily. This is an example of some of the videos. These are two of the ones that I was part of the videos for the microcapsules. And I hope you might see this. This is the interactive learning modules. Can you see a screen on top of my slide? Okay, so this is the one of the interactive modules for module 1, one of the interactive spaces for module 1. And so it shifts, these are each of the components you can click and it adds, these are some webinars that I made available. It makes available also additional references that the students can see. You can go back to the menu and interact with the different lessons. There are also some activities that they can do, videos, etc. So it makes it for a very engaging and interactive opportunity. There's something in the chat. So the course recruited in total 86 participants, 72 of which came from Latin American countries and 27 from the Caribbean archipelago. We had a nice participation of people, 7 from Mexico, 7 from Bolivia, 10 from Colombia, 5 from Ecuador, Belize, and Brazil, 4 from Cuba. Other countries had from between 1 and 3 participants. In total, I don't remember how many countries we had in total, but 86 participants. Regarding the faculty, we had 30 faculty, most of them also from Latin America. In this map, you can see, here, in this previous map, you can see all the countries that were represented, and the highest volume was from Colombia, but you can see that we had from almost every country. We didn't have any Puerto Rican as a student. The course did recruit the participation of an incredible array of 30 faculty, most of them also from Latin America and the Caribbean. Here in this map, I count as Puerto Rico, not as United States. And something very cool was that a third of the faculty were women. So it was a wonderful opportunity to engage with an awesome and diverse group of specialists and scholars. At the end of the course, we held a 2-day international symposium celebrating the 20 years of the 2001 UNESCO Convention and the closing of the training workshop. The symposium was broadcasted through Facebook. This wonderful meeting grouped together 23 presenters who spoke in Spanish and English and presented various highly relevant topics, from updates about the state of underwater cultural heritage research and management in different countries such as Peru, Cuba, Argentina, Panama, Chile, El Salvador, Brazil, Mexico, the Lesser Antilles, to community engagement for long-term management in Puerto Rico and Colombia, and examples of case studies such as Port Royal in Jamaica, maritime mobility in Venezuela, living museums in Dominican Republic, among many other topics. There is certainly a lot of work to do in all areas, improving our methods, building more skills, supporting publications, curtailing looting, engaging with communities, stimulating ethical practice in underwater archaeology. I feel that Latin America and the Caribbean as a region, while at some point I thought that they were lagging behind, we are currently running towards a significant transformation in skill set building and management strategies for the protection of underwater cultural heritage. We most certainly have to thank the mother of underwater archaeology in Latin America, Pilar Luna Reguerena, who passed away in 2020, but who certainly inspired us to be better and who trailblazed underwater archaeology internationally at UNESCO, in everywhere in Mexico and Latin America specifically. These meetings, symposia, and conversations have shown us that we have such an amazing, rich, and diverse cultural heritage that marine and underwater, not just underwater, marine and coastal and underwater cultural heritage in Latin America and the Caribbean. It also demonstrated that there is much interest to work for its protection, but that we also need further capacity building, support, and more systematic capacitation, as well as the development of local and regional legislation to protect underwater cultural heritage. The conversations have also highlighted the massive threats that disaster capitalism and project development poses to heritage underwater and on the coasts. To end, I want to just post some final thoughts. Working with the UNESCO in this course was wonderful for me. There is a lot of amazing scholars nearby doing great work. There's also a lot of things that we still have to do. This course also invited me to think about our practice here in the United States. I feel there is so much that we still have to improve to be better in the protection of underwater cultural heritage, not only within territorial waters of the United States, but also in our work elsewhere more generally. I know there's much more I could do for my own context in Puerto Rico, for example. With this talk, I would like to end by, as I mentioned before, inviting all of us to read over the annex of the 2001 UNESCO Convention, to read the Code of Ethics, and to think how our activities can impact and improve the protection of underwater cultural heritage as defined in the convention 20 years ago, and how can we think about our work to support capacity building in our neighboring countries. I feel the SCMA can help lead this way. Thanks so much, and I want to leave you with this really cool graffiti that was drawn by sailors in a water reservoir at English Harbor in Antigua, and that still remains to be studied in more detail, but it's super awesome. Many thanks for your time and attention today, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Isabel. Yeah, this is, you can hear us all clapping. And wow, there's a whole, well, we actually had like 50 people here when I'm looking at that screen down at the bottom. Awesome. And
oh my God, look at that.
So Isabel, first of all, congratulations for being selected to be a part of that important UNESCO meeting. And you brought so much back to us that we can use. So, you know, kudos for that. And I do want to, before I ask a question, I just want to give a shout out for Lauren Clark, who organized this meeting. And thank you, Lauren, for all your help on this. And Lauren's helping us organize the SCMA Lecture Series, and Isabel's playing a big part of that. so I'm going to be thrown out of this this library momentarily, but I wanted to ask Isabel, when we talk about UNESCO World Heritage Sites terrestrially, there's like 1,200 of them, and it requires a lot of commitment on the part of countries that get their sites elected to that. Are any underwater sites part of UNESCO's World Cultural Heritage program?
List. I actually do not know. I have been involved with, so there are parallel efforts. I have been working with ICOMOS. ICOMOS is the international organization. ICOMOS means International Council on Monuments and Sites, and it is the NGO under UNESCO that is in charge of nominating and creating the list and maintaining and deciding about World Heritage Sites. And World Heritage Sites have to comply with a specific set of characteristics that are codified as the outstanding universal value. And there's a series of criteria that they have to comply. It could be natural, it could be cultural. I do not know if there is I can check. I do not know if there's an underwater cultural heritage, but getting into the list is very hard, first, and second, is very problematic for many countries. Actually, in the California Vulnerability Assessment, we are questioning the applicability of outstanding universal value for assessment of the value of heritage. So it is, it is a very interesting question. I can check.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because a lot of times, like in Jordan, if you elect a site and you can't keep up to the standards demanded by UNESCO,
it's a problem.
Big problem.
It is a problem. Actually, imagine California only has one World Heritage Site, and it is a building in San Francisco that it's historical. It doesn't mean anything for everyone else. And it does not, many of the sites that are important for the tribes, for example, do not qualify for outstanding universal value. Does it mean that they are not valuable? It doesn't mean that. The outstanding universal value, actually, I have my issues with it. It is something that is very discriminating, because who decides what is universal? Who decides what are the criteria of these elements? But it does serve a guide for many practitioners. So yeah, that could be a whole nother conversation. I really don't think I have heard of a site that is underwater site that is included in the list. I think all of the sites are on land.
Yeah. Okay,
but it is problematic. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I see in the chat that Moon thanks you so much for the presentation, and she asks how the convention might interact with spiritual aspects of these heritage sites. So
the 2001 UNESCO Convention for the Protection of Underwater Cultural Heritage addresses material culture mostly. It does prioritize the perspective of valuing like burial sites, and the fact that many of these cultural heritage, material cultural heritage, is important for people in general. But whenever we go to conventions that are at the level of UNESCO and they are talking about global, there's a lot of details of who are you talking to and who is important, like the same thing I was saying about outstanding universal value. There are some details that get lost in the applicability of it. And in many of the conventions of the UNESCO at that global level are not really practical in real life. It misses the detail of individuals. So while it does mention the importance of preserving the things in situ, of allowing people to have access and interaction and learn and engage educationally with these sites, but it does not address the intangible aspects of underwater cultural heritage, because their goal is to stop looting. So it's a more like this Western perspective of the focus of cultural heritage, focus specifically on tangible aspects. Does not I don't think, aside of saying we have to respect human remains and we should not touch them, It doesn't address spiritual elements, intangible elements.
Do we have some more comments or questions? Margie.
Yeah, thank you, Isabel. That was really very interesting. I had a couple of questions. First a comment, and that's about the value of being named a UNESCO World Heritage Site, because it actually can be problematic.
It is.
Because it can focus attention on a particular location and bring hordes of tourists and other kinds of commercial activities that can actually endanger a site. So it's sort of a mixed bag, isn't it?
I personally don't like we are talking about two separate things. The 2001 UNESCO Convention for the Protection of Underwater Cultural Heritage has nothing to do with the World Heritage Site list. These are two things. All the things that are as defined in the 2001 UNESCO Convention as cultural heritage, buildings and anything that, like I said it in, let me see if I find, one of my first slides where I define what is cultural heritage. It includes sites and structures and buildings and artifacts. They don't have World Heritage Site, the list of World Heritage Site. And this idea of World Heritage as defined by the Convention of ICOMOS only qualify to be added in that list components that comply with this concept of outstanding universal value and the criteria that they set. And as I mentioned before, it could be cultural criteria or natural criteria or a combination of both. But there are items that are culturally relevant but do not comply with the specific definition of outstanding universal value as defined by World Heritage Sites. Now, that does not apply to underwater cultural heritage because the convention protects everything, anything that is underwater that has been fully submerged or partially submerged for at least 100 years. Everything is protected. So it does not, because remember that the convention the 2001 UNESCO Convention was created with the idea of curtailing looting, finding looting and finding exploitation of the heritage as damaging for the preservation of cultural heritage. And the fact that while land archaeology is protected by land law, and there are many different legislations in different nations that protect their land heritage, that is not true for underwater archaeology, for underwater elements. Many of the laws for the protection of archaeology end at the sea. That is why many countries have different legislation that protect land versus underwater heritage. Because once you get to the underwater, then UNCLOS applies this element of the territorial waters, the exclusive exploitation zone, this map that I had shown. So when we think about cultural heritage underwater, the states don't have the same power to define what needs to be done as they do with terrestrial archaeology. In terrestrial archaeology, state can say whatever happens within their boundaries. But once we get to the underwater, the boundary of the nation changes as they get to this intertidal zone, and then they have exclusive possibility, exclusive power to say what happens within their territorial sea, but that is just 12 nautical miles. So if we go in very shallow shelves or different contexts, then after we move after the 12 nautical miles, then we get to that gray zone, that of international relationships, boundaries between countries, that cannot be covered by the national power of each country. And then that's when the UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, that's when it starts applying. But it didn't address cultural heritage. That's why the United Nations Convention on the Sea. So most than anything is kind of to protect heritage in spite of the grayness of the oceans, which not individual nations don't have the same power in underwater territories, because their power does not extend legally beyond the 12 nautical miles that was agreed in the United Nations. Does that make sense?
Yes, makes sense.
There are two different things. We cannot when we're talking about UNESCO cultural heritage underwater, it's not the same as talking about World Heritage Sites, even though it's also UNESCO.
Why 100 years? I assume that's just arbitrary.
It's arbitrary and it's European. In the United States, they tend to talk about 50 years. It's an arbitrary number. It's just to say something that is old. But in the United States, the National Register for Historic Places sets the date for qualifying to the register as 50 years.
I don't think 50 is old, but never mind. Just
I
saying.
know.
Right,
I'm not there yet, but I don't want to be archaeological yet.
So we have about 3 more minutes. So if somebody would like to make another comment or a question, this has been great. I'm about to be thrown out of the library. They close at 4.
Oh my God.
Does anybody have another comment? This has been great.
I'll ask another question.
Yeah.
Is the training you were describing, which looked really impressive, and I'd like to take it, but probably not eligible. Is there any plan for assessing the outcomes of that training?
They have been assessed. I just don't have the data myself, or not to present it today, but I could find it. But there has a part. So actually, I'm going to, I hope they don't kick you out yet. But
I'll probably say goodbye, and then you guys can keep talking. That's absolutely fine.
That sounds cool. I just want to quickly share this screen. Let me see if I'm having the right screen. Sorry, very, very quickly, because I want to show you the convention, the manual. So the manual for underwater archaeology, there's one for Asia and the Pacific, and there is one for. Okay, bye, Tom. Thanks.
Bye. Thank you so much, Isabel.
You're welcome.
Bye.
I'll be finishing quickly.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks. So you should be seeing now my screen. Ignore all the tabs that are open. But this is the manual. It is available online. And I can share the links with any of you if you want. But if you just search UNESCO's Digital Library and the title, you'll come across it. But the last part of the manual, sorry that I'm moving this quickly. The last part of the manual includes evaluating the foundation course. So there was a specific process, not only established, but also envisioned in the writing of the manual to evaluate this initial course. The courses are taught every so often. And I guess that at some point, we have the hopes that the next one, I think, should, for Latin America. There hasn't been one for the United States, I think. No, there hasn't been one in the United States. But I hope that this one we were hoping to teach it again possibly next year, but I don't know how that's going to happen. But we would really like to make it in person in Colombia, hopefully, or Cuba. So I'm not sure how that's going to go. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. But there are, as I mentioned, there is a series of training manuals available. My course in underwater archaeology broadly follows more or less not the same detail, because this is a lot more detailed, but it broadly follows the spirit of this training manual, and hopefully I can make better use of it in the future.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's been awesome. It's been a really good opportunity. I was talking today with Carlos del Cairo, and we have plans. We would like to have a field course in Colombia of underwater archaeology, together with an institution there, and in collaboration with the local communities and the indigenous communities in Colombia. But that still needs some time. So there are some conversations that I'm having there. But this course is awesome, and UNESCO convention has the website for the UNESCO 2001 UNESCO convention has a lot of resources and more, reading material and training material that we could follow, and including some, online videos and things like that could be very useful.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else? One final last burning thought of any of the participants? Thank you, Nadine. Thanks so much. I'm glad that you guys enjoyed it, and thank you so much.
Thanks so much for being here, Isabel. Well, everybody will hopefully look forward to more SCMA lectures the rest of the year and for the following years. But we promise to give more notice than this one for the next ones. But yeah, thanks everyone for coming, and the recording will be up somewhere next week, hopefully, once we decide where to put it up. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.